So I just wanted to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the Art Gallery of Peterborough is located on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory, and the territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. And I'm really glad that we've got reasonable weather here, because I can recall back not too long ago to the opening when we were glad to see as many people as we did, but we knew that there were a lot of our friends from the region and from Toronto that just didn't make it. So thanks to the weather for cooperating with us as much as it has. And I also wanted to start with thanking our sponsors and our funders, because of course, without the Canada Council, the Ontario Arts Council, and of course the support of the City of Peterborough, we would not be here. We wouldn't be in this fantastic building. We wouldn't have the opportunity to bring incredible artists and guest curators here. So thanks to those guys. So the plan for today basically is we're going to do a conversation between the guest curator, Lori Vivas, and the artist, Shelley Nero. There will be some time for you guys to ask some questions, so please hold those till the end. And when that is concluded, we'll work fairly quickly down here to disappear the chairs so the exhibition gets back to normal for you guys. And while that's happening, please feel free to go on upstairs. We've got a few refreshments, some hot cider, before you go out and brave the cold. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lori, and she's going to begin.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon. And thank you, Shelley, for agreeing to do this. So I just wanted to just sort of start kind of at the beginning and just talk about your life experiences and art experiences across your lifetime, and hoping that you can start by telling us where you grew up.
Well, I was born in Niagara Falls, New York. I was born in Niagara Falls, New York, and I stayed there until I was either 4 or 5 years old. I don't really remember. I just remember being excited about going to kindergarten the next fall. But then my parents moved to Six Nations, and I never did get to kindergarten. And then I grew up on Six Nations until I was about 18, and moved away and went to college. What else?
Did you know from a fairly young age that you wanted to be an artist?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to be an artist, but I don't know. I didn't want to start putting the label on myself as artist, because to me it looked like it was a fashion statement more than a vocation. And I don't know, I kind of wanted to find that thread in my own life to know how to become an artist and know how to say I am an artist. Because I think there's a huge responsibility with that label. And it's something that I just pursued from a very young age, just looking at other people's art that was around me. And I always acknowledged people who made things that lived in my environment, and they were like drum makers and rattle makers and soapstone carvers and more or less the traditional types of art that I grew up with.
On Six Nations.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So, and were there specific people that you intervened with in childhood, or you were just sort of aware of what was happening? And was there a sort of ceremonial, I know that at Hiawatha there was no powwows or anything like that through the sort of early part of my life even. And so was there a powwow, or were there powwow workers and people doing things and ceremonial and also making art that sort of connected to the past?
I was aware that there were ceremonies, but my family never participated in those ceremonies. But I did know that these people made things for a ceremony, but they also made it to create their own economic platform that they could, sell and keep on living through that. So it was kind of like something that was just quite natural to see these people making what they make, and knowing that what they made was used it was multifaceted, not just to sell to the public.
Right. How about in your own family, like in your own home when you were kids? Like I know what do you have, 4 siblings?
Yeah.
So did you kids make art? Did you do things at home? And
Yeah, we made a lot of soapstone carvings on our kitchen table, and when it came down to lunchtime, we'd have to clear up all the soapstone dust and put everything away and have our lunch and then go back to work after. It was, yeah, and it was like look at it, get a piece of stone, look and see what the shape calls for, because you couldn't, like, the stone dictated what you're going to do with it. So, you know, I spent some time doing that. And just making stuff was a huge family activity, because my parents would quite often take stuff and go to powwows and sell stuff like that. And that was their way of getting income into the family.
right. Do you remember some of the things that they made?
Yeah, they made, you know, earrings, necklaces, I don't know, it was like purses, you know. The stuff wasn't quality,
Yeah.
it was more about quantity.
And to generate
Yeah,
income.
yeah. So it was like, you know, it was like, let's just get this done. And so we'd all be there doing our bit.
And so you participated in that, in making the things as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Grudgingly.
Grudgingly, of course, as any kid would.
Yeah, I think that's why I resisted being an artist for so long. It's like, I don't want to do that.
So, who was the first Indigenous artist that you discovered, and how old were you?
Well, I think I was about
Yes, sort of
7.
outside of your community.
Yeah.
Is sort of what I'm thinking.
I remember seeing a print of Norvell Morisseau's on the wall of a dentist, or was it eyeglasses? I forget. Anyways, seeing something on the wall, and I thought, that's Indian art, you know. Took me a while to appreciate Norvell Morisseau. And then another one was Daphne Ojig, who I could understand and relate to, because she was doing realistic drawings of her environment, and most often I came across her work anyways, through just little touristy handy notes, or what are they called? Handy notes, I think. And just thinking, wow, that's an Indian woman and she can draw like that, you know, so I was really fascinated that she could actually draw almost like a photographic drawing. So I was really impressed by her. And that's about it when I first started looking at Native. And there were other artists in my environment that I'd see, like people from my reserve really did nice hand color paintings of people like in traditional costume, and it was really elegantly performed.
What sort of medium?
Watercolor?
Watercolor.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So it was really delicate.
Right.
And I was always impressed by those, because I've tried to do watercolor and my watercolors aren't that delicate. They're very, like, you know, I use it like acrylic paint more than watercolor.
Right. And did seeing the Daphne Ojigs, did it have an impact on what you started to do in your, for example, did you start drawing like things around you or family scenes or anything like that? Or?
Yes, I always tried to draw. I don't consider myself to be like a drawer that, you know, I think, oh, look, you know, but it's something that really made me interested in trying to draw. And I still try, but, you know, just one of those lifelong struggles of an artist that I will continue.
Because you would prefer to paint than to draw still?
Yeah, I think it's, painting is, you can be pretty aggressive with paint. And I think in like the pastels that are in the hallway there, those are drawings, but they're pastel, but you can treat them like, you know, paints as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Are there other artists? Well, I guess we sort of talked about this, but are there any artists who are working right now that you're finding particularly interesting and influencing you and sort of making you think
Yeah.
about things in a different way?
I always like to look and see what artists are doing because I find their use of the material and the direction they're going is always fascinating because it's like sometimes, you know, I could be thinking about something in the same way and then to see how they're approaching it and thinking about the same things as I am, it's like, you know, we must have met somewhere in the cosmos and put our thoughts together and now we're working in this field or this area. It's always a hard question because I can never think up names right off the bat like that. But I don't know. Artists are just amazing. You know, they keep creating and they keep being pretty innovative what they're doing. So, yeah, I can't think of anybody.
That's okay. That's okay. Can you tell us about the first exhibition that you were in and how that had? Do you remember the first exhibition you were in? Do you remember what year it was?
I was about 10 years old. No.
Well, you're only 29 now.
Yeah, that's right. The first exhibition I was in was called Changers, and it was 10 Native women. It was shown at the Harbourfront in 1990, and it was pretty amazing because I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. And it had Joan Cardinal Schubert, Jane S. Patra, Rebecca Baird, Rebecca Belmore, Doreen Jensen, and who else was in there? Alanisa Bomsawin was in there. Faye Heavyshield. Am I missing somebody else? There were 10 of us. And it was just really, really great to see all that work that went up on the wall. And when I was asked to be a part of that show, I was really happy and excited. And somebody said, could you send us a resume? I said, I can tell you my resume over the phone. There's nothing there. So I think I was in a couple Indian art shows at the Woodland Cultural Center in Brantford. So that was probably as far as my resume went. So from there, it just, you know, I started adding on to that resume.
Because in 1990 you were at OCA still?
No, I graduated that year.
Oh, you'd graduated.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you think they found you?
Don't know, but I think then too, Native artists were very small in number, and there was a show that was held at Ontario Arts Council. I think it was in the year before, and maybe, you know, somebody saw the work then.
Mm-hmm. That was a really auspicious group of people that you're included in. That's amazing.
Yeah.
There's practically, I've looked for the catalog and there's no I don't know if you've ever seen it, Caroline or anybody, but it's amazing. And I don't know if was Harbourfront, so I don't know if there's even any there must be documentation for
there
it
must
somewhere,
be,
but
yeah.
it's just like
Was it at the power plant or
No, it wasn't the power
I think
plant.
it was just in the Harbourfront.
Yeah.
It was like sort of, you know, one of those other gallery spaces, and
gallery space? Yeah.
because I think it was
So curated.
Shirley Bear.
yeah, Shirley Bear from
Yeah.
the East Coast, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'll keep looking for it.
Okay.
Do you know what you put in it?
I had Waitress,
Oh yes. Okay.
and I had The Rebel,
Oh great.
and I had another photograph titled Tall and Big Man, and it was a photograph of an artist standing beside a billboard advertising tall and big man shops.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was
We'll
a
get
good
to
show.
humor in a minute. So how did it feel to be in that exhibition? Did it sort of give you momentum? Because you were, you know, I guess you were, as an emerging artist who's just graduated, how did you feel about?
I was really scared. It was like a very nervous time for me to be in a show like that, and you know, I just didn't know what to expect, didn't know what to do. So it's, you know, I was really kind of, didn't know where to, you know, what to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think that show traveled quite a bit.
Did it?
I think so. I don't know.
I'll see what I can find out about it. I found a tiny quote from Ryan Rice, and he's written that your work draws upon a narrative of identity, self-discovery, and belonging. Do you agree with him?
I do.
And how? Oh, that's good. But how do you place yourself in that statement? Do you? I know that we.
Well, I think every time I make work, I always go through those stages of like, sometimes I concentrate on being an Iroquois person and try to not get caught up in the rhetoric of being Mohawk, because sometimes it's almost like an easy thing to step through saying, okay, I'm a Mohawk and here's my work, But I really want to explore where that is coming from and where it leads me. For example, this piece here, Grand River, that's just outside of the reserve. On the other side is Caledonia. I took this photograph just at the time, I think it was right after the conflict in Caledonia, and I think this photograph really illustrates what that conflict is all about. So we see the Grand River sign, and then right across the river is the hydro towers that are just on the edge of Caledonia. And to me, it just references the economic source and what all of that is all about. And what was the other two?
No, just it just talks about you're drawing upon this sort of the narrative of your life, but your identity and discovery, self-discovery. So you're finding yourself in your work as you go along, and the sense of belonging that you have to the Turtle Clan and to Haudenosaunee and to yourself and your family and.
Yeah, I think it's. For me, it's like half the fun putting those parts into a piece of work. It gives it meaning. Other people who have the same identity as myself, I hope they see a reflection of themselves in it. And if other people can see themselves in the work, then I think, okay, I've done my job here, as opposed to just making landscape painting, So that's what I try to cover.
And so moving slightly from putting yourself in the work to putting your family in the work, you've like we have the Rebel and the Mohawk, or the Iroquois is a highly developed matriarchal society, and those two works sort of are there with your mom front and center in both of them. So it's sort of, can you talk to us a little bit about putting your family and using your family as your models and having them in your work and what that does for you and for them, and are they willing participants and all that?
Yeah. Well, I grew up at a time when Native people were very poor. They lived in poverty. Photos were like the last thing on their mind to archive and hold on to. And so when it comes back to looking at films and thinking, those people are so lucky they can have a film, they can look at themselves over and over and over again. And I always thought that it was important to archive my family in my own kind of way, so that we always have those images there, so that we can look at them years down the road and say, oh yeah, that, I remember when I took the picture, and I took the picture of that person then, and what it means to me personally. It might not mean the same thing to people looking at the photo, but for me it creates an emotional history around it. So it's, I just like using my family as much as I can. And I like to put them in my work, but then I also have to step back and not put them in my work all the time.
And do they contribute? Do they collaborate, or do you tell them what to do? Like, did you, for example, in the Rebel, did you say, do you want to jump up on the hood or the trunk of the car there, or did she just do that? Or?
Well, it's just having a camera saying, let me take a picture of you, and then I think she just stretched out across the car like that and took the picture, and history has been made.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So I always try to keep it joyful, so that when you have the memories of the work, it's like, yeah, I remember that when that was done. That was fun.
And now getting Raven to granddaughter to,
Yeah.
is she is it based on a photograph, or did she sit for you? or-
She sat a little bit and I took a photograph.
Uh-huh.
So I did both, yeah.
Okay.
But she enjoyed being in that painting.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Yes. And you've used many other sort of sisters and daughters and nephews and nieces, and sort of again that's still coming back to sort of just developing a sort of body of work that with people that you know, and yeah.
Yeah, it seems like I've always emphasized the female presence in my work, and it's using my sisters and my mother and friends. And I just want it, without even thinking about it too much, I want it to have Native women present in the work, to say these are real people and this is what real people look like, as opposed to making more images that sort of fill that stereotype of, not that they're not beautiful, but I just didn't want to keep on creating that kind of image. So I just wanted to have a full-bodied person in front of that camera.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, this is not Ryan Rice, but Alan Ryan. It's a really ancient quote, but I still kind of like it. But he says, "Women, especially those in their middle years, have rarely been portrayed with such candor and confidence. It may well take a Mohawk woman to photograph a Mohawk woman." And I think it's because he was getting to the idea of not locating people in the past, not racializing them, and also not sexualizing women's bodies. And I think that's something that's always comes through and comes back again and again in the way that you're portraying people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too that over the years, like at first I think I had a clear idea what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it and how I was going to do it, but as the years have gone on, now I just do it, without really going through those steps, like now I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it this way, I'm doing it for this reason, blah, blah, blah. Whereas I guess it's so much part of my work now that, it's there anyways,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it more interesting.
Good.
Yeah.
It was actually interesting because right now in the video is the shirt with Halea, and then around the corner we've got your daughter, and I know that in Stories of Women, a number of your artist friends collaborated or were participants in the work. How is it to work with artist friends and like Laurie Blondeau and Halea Tisanjani and do they sort of direct it in any way, or do they just like hand themselves over to you? And
mostly they just let me take their picture, and then I take that photograph and then I start manipulating it so that it tells their own narrative too. I'm hoping that their story comes through in the work, and it's not just a picture of a person, Yeah. For example, Laurie's not here, but there's one with Laurie Blondeau, and it's called something about Beyond the Horizons or something like that. And underneath her are 4 buffalo that represent her kids, because she has 4 children, and she's a Blackfoot. She's a Blackfoot person from Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan, Gordon River, or Gordon Reserve, yeah.
I also have a small photoshopped image of Edward Curtis in that photograph too, just to remind myself that these are the kind of photos that were taken of Indian people, and I'm sort of like appropriating some of that imagery for my benefit. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about the shirt and with Halea Tisanjani?
Yeah, the shirt was made in 2003. It started in 2002. I was flying to a photo conference in Texas, Houston, Texas, and I just looked at the landscape outside the window and realized that all the landscape was cut up and parceled and probably owned and possessed by people, because it was like everything was so square, it looked like a blanket. So then I start thinking about the history of North America and how everything was owned now, and what people had to go through. And I was thinking about Native people and what they did to try to hold on to their land or their territory. And the words that came to my head just came to me very quickly, like, you know, all of the destruction of colonizers, what they did on Native people. So when I got to the conference, I asked Helea and her partner, Veronica Pasalacqua, if they would be interested in participating in this photo essay that I wanted to do, and they said, yeah. So great. So I went home, came back maybe a year later, and brought my video camera, and we did a video, because I was also invited to participate in the IA3, which is the Indian Alliance of America. I don't know, I forget the whole thing, but it was to take it to the Venice Biennale. So the curator of that show, Nancy Mythlow, said, don't bring anything that is valuable or worth any money, because it will disappear. Oh, okay. So instead of showing the photo essay, I made a video. And yeah, that's how that came into being. But it happened really fast, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it was. So I didn't know that the shirt was shown in Venice. So because you did Grace in Venice as well at that same with Laurie. Was that the same year?
No, that was the year later, or the
Oh,
next, and
the
that
next
was
one,
2007.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
Great. So I guess this is a good way for us to sort of move on and talk about your connection to the land and sort of women's presence on the land. And so can you, and nice to bring in sort of to be sort of in between these two pieces
Yeah.
here. Can you talk about your relationship to the Grand River and what it means to you? And
Yeah, well, Six Nations is right on the Grand River, and it was a big part of our life when we were growing up. You know, even though it was probably so polluted that you couldn't eat anything out of it, we'd go fish or swimming in the river, and of course we'd come home and have to take a bath right away. But it was still a big part of our childhood. And I remember my dad, he'd take us for walks along the river quite a bit, and it must have been a big part of his life, because he, you know, it was still he made it a part of our life. And Tutla here was also part of that, going to the river. And he, you know, would just tell us, because it didn't look, and it doesn't look like this now, but when he took us there, it was just a little stretch along of a road just outside of Brantford. And he said, you know, this is where Tutla Indians lived, and they're not here anymore. And of course, being kids, you never really pay attention to what somebody's telling you. You go, oh, yeah. And, so, but at the same time, those sorts of things really stuck with me. So when I started getting older and I started doing my own research on these different areas in Brantford, Tutla was a big part of that. And I worked on a film in 1991, and part of that narrative was put into the film. And it was about, you know, memory, and how the Tutla Indians came to Six Nations looking for a place to live, because they were escaping Indian wars out west, and Six Nations let them have this area of land here. And in history books, it talks about how they, you know, died off from disease, but then other people say they didn't really die off, but they were absorbed into the Six Nations, and how some of the songs and some of the ceremonies are now part of Cayuga ceremonies. And so, you know, it's just like little whispers of history that come to me, and I remember them. And I just think, wow, that's really kind of poetic, that those little bits of history that were, you know, kind of passed. They weren't specifically said, oh, you must remember this, but it was just kind of like, you know, oral history, and then I remember it, and then part of that oral history gets transferred into my art. And what?
well, because it's interesting to sort of just be thinking about the way that you interact with this territory, and then sort of as a child, and then through the time that you've the research that you've done, and you know, I know we've talked a lot about the Haldeman Decree and how, you know, that's the land base, like every reserve land
Right.
in this country, has shrunk from the original treaties and things like that. So that always seems to be something that you're trying to sort of bring forward again, and then just also the fact that the presence has always been on the land, whether it's ancestors or cultural experience, or just simply working the land in a way that's not necessarily based on hydropoles and things like that.
Right.
But I just also think about something like the really poetic way that you insert ancestors and reiterate who was on the land before, is like thinking about Kissed by Lightning, which is coming here on Thursday night, and how when Mavis and Bug are lost in Upper New York State in a snowy landscape, and they're stopping and about to argue, and then the ancestors pass the road in front of them, and Bug actually says they look like they're lost, and in fact, actually, I think that sort of translates back. So it's kind of a nice way to think about the way that you put people back onto the land, and
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to say something about that, but.
Yeah, it's funny because, if I'm working on a script like Kissed by Lightning, which I worked on for, 10 years or something, it really gives you a great opportunity to sit down and really have those thoughts kind of come to fruition, because it's not like I think about those things all the time, but because I'm sitting there with my own thoughts, and then you can really kind of let things fly, It's like bring those things together, and creating that warrior scene was really kind of a lot of times those things come out of the blue, because if you've traveled through the Mohawk Valley and you're kind of in search of not answers, but just kind of an appreciation of memory, and so I always think about warriors whose spirits are still there, and we don't live there anymore. So I think, I wonder how these spirits how are they doing? How are they feeling? I'm sure part of the Iroquois Confederacy is addressing that as they go and they do their ceremonies. But it's something that I think about personally, and it's something that I just question. Oh, I was going to say something. I forget. I forget what I was going to say.
But you told me once a long time ago, 30 minutes, what about your dad and how he talked about the Mohawk Valley, and then you realized that he'd never been there before, and I think that's really interesting, the way that you can sort of hold memories in the body that you haven't actually necessarily experienced.
Yeah, it's kind of strange, because he would always talk about the Mohawk Valley and how beautiful he heard it would be, and these are memories of his grandmother and how he held those memories for her, and then it feels like I'm holding those memories for him. And so when you actually get there and you see how beautiful the landscape is, you think, oh my goodness, for people to leave, and they were leaving in a rush, because Washington was out to really kill them off, and so you think there must have been so much terror at the time that they had to leave that way. And people were told, don't go back, don't ever go back there. So I think about that too.
Can you talk to us about because another one of the conversations that you and I've had over and over again is also the importance of the peacemaker to you and to your story, and to the way that you sort of bring it into your work and make it part of you as well.
Yeah.
So maybe you start by telling people who don't know who the Great Peacemaker is.
Well, that's a 10-day conversation, Lori.
We have time. Don't worry.
There's I don't think it's a ceremony, but they call it the Great Law, and it takes 10 days, and that's when the story of the peacemaker is really kind of told, and it's usually told in Mohawk. But when I was in grade 7, we were given that story in school, and And then sometimes I think, I get too hooked on just the rhetoric of the story. I really want to explore what the story meant and what's it supposed to mean, and what's sort of the bottom line here. So when I was doing my MFA, I spent time reading versions, tried to piece together what it did mean, and it's really about after first contact, excuse me, it's been recorded that at the time there were 19 million Indigenous people in North America, and within 6 months of contact, it went down to 600,000. I'm a little dry. And the people that were left were really brought up in an orphan state because, excuse me, because there was nobody there to teach them how to live and and manners and culture. Excuse me. And after I don't know how many years went by, it was prophesied that somebody's going to come and be born and take people out of the darkness that everyone had been living in. And of course, there were prophets that had come through and or said they were the prophet, and they weren't. So Mohawks said, we have to come up with a test. The next guy that says that, we're going to tie him to a tree and throw him in the falls, and if he survives, he is. If he doesn't, we know he's not. So that's what happened. Peacemaker came along and he said, I'm the prophet, and they tied him to a tree and threw him in the waterfalls, and he did survive. So people listened to him, and then he met up with Hiawatha, and Hiawatha became his spokesperson because the prophet also had a cleft lip. So in order to present himself in front of people, you had to be a great orator, and he was having difficulty. So Hiawatha took on the duty of being that orator. And I just find that story so interesting because there's so many little pieces of the story that you could build like a whole film around it. And I just find that really kind of captivating. And I just think, wow, it's so amazing that ancestors could think up these stories and make it part of the culture. And I put it in my work. Kissed by Lightning is based on that story. Oh, no, it's not based on that story. Part of the story is in there. But it's about thinking with a clear mind, wiping away the tears of grief so that you can think with that clear mind, because if your mind is so full of grief, you won't be able to think at all. And the bottom line to me is looking after yourself, and then you can help others and help look after them. And if you can't look after yourself, you will not be any good to anybody else. So that's kind of that in a nutshell.
That's perfect. And so one of the interesting things is this work, the essential sensuality of ceremony, that's just on the wall on that side, is really interesting because, of course, the Peacemaker and Hiawatha were men, but in this work you switch it, and that the woman is the one who's doing the caretaking or the moving the man forward.
Right.
Why did you feel it was important to sort of switch the sex roles?
Well, in part of the stories, there's a woman named Jikonsase, and she is now given the title of Mother of All Nations, and she was a character in the story who was not doing good for people. Hunters would come through her territory, and she would poison them and really just kill them off. And Peacemaker said, why are you doing this? Or was it another character? I'm sorry, I'm getting my characters mixed up here. I think it was Tadadaho. Anyways, she came to realize that she was not doing good and she could be doing good. So at that point, she became a provider and a helper, and she started looking after people passing through her territory. And because of her, then other people were able to see the change she made, and for Elsa to have a good life based on her example.
I think it's, I'm so happy. I only ever saw this work in book form, like online or in books before, and so I think I'm so happy that we borrowed it from Libraries and Archives Canada, and it was so nice that they lent it to us, and it's so wonderful to have this piece here, so thank you very much. I think I have thousands of more things I can ask you about, but I think we're actually at a point now where we can just open it up and see if other people have questions and comments or Julia?
Thank you very much to both of you. I just wanted to go back a little bit and just for a piece of information. I gather that you did go to the Ontario College of Art and you have, which I don't know whether you got your MFA from there or what, I'm not sure what that, but I just wondered how you made the shift from this kind of informal environment of art making that was nurtured in your home to making the shift to going into an academic program to actually become an artist.
I started reading people's resumes. Hey, they went to university, or, I started realizing that in order to get to the next level of being an artist, you have to have a certain amount of credential. And being a woman, being a Native woman, I realized I had to work extra hard to get to that level. Otherwise, you could be dismissed. Is this on? Is that working? Okay. And then,
Good job.
that was my best answer yet. Yeah, so it's just a matter of trying to be professional and seeing what other people did to reach that level of professionalism. It's just like, trying to place yourself within the accepted institutions. Okay. Yeah.
I think it's also interesting that, that's catching me now, that one of your early experiences in terms of life and art experiences was going to Durham College.
Right.
And that you went in originally, and not to speak for you, but I know that you, because you're in my dissertation, that you went into a design program and then quickly realized that this wasn't for you, but
Right.
then found photography.
Yeah.
And that was,
Yep, they had a great photography teacher, and he, sometimes you get a teacher and everything they say to you like sticks to your head, and he was one of those teachers, and it was basic black and white photography, and I just sort of went through the motions of learning how to work in the darkroom. And another class in that course was a history of art, and sometimes things just hang on. Whereas some other things is like, why am I here? Yeah, but history of art and photography were the two things from Durham College that really, and drawing. I also took a drawing course there too. And so it just made me happy and more curious, and it just made me want to pursue more those fields.
what did it feel like the first time you picked up a camera?
It was amazing. It's like magic. It's still like magic to me when I pick up a camera, any kind of camera. It could even be a digital camera, and then working through the process of having an image and then seeing how far you can take that image, and just having that knowledge, knowing how to print something and what to do with it. I don't know, it's just so much fun. I'm all out for fun.
You haven't talked about your beadwork at all, which I find beautifully sculptural. But as I said, I'm really interested in the hats. And I wonder if you could talk about their shape and kind of the intent of those hats, because they seem like that you had a purpose in mind for them.
Yeah, well, they're based on Glengarry bonnets, and when Scottish people came here, I can only imagine how they got from their Glengarry bonnet to the Iroquois Glengarry bonnet, because I think we're great appropriators. And I think they saw the design of that hat, and they thought, wow, what a great design. And so if you see those hats in museums, you think they're so beautiful, because you can, do all this fancy beadwork on them, and which I tried, but it's not as fancy as some of those hats that I've seen. And I don't know, I just like the idea of making a hat to put on your head, and it's like a sculpture in itself. That's, I don't know.
In the rehanging of the historic and the contemporary collection at the National Gallery, there's a number of ones from the from about 1880s, I think, of the Glengarry hats by Mohawk artists. And so it was very exciting to go there in the summer last year and see them there, especially as I knew that these hats were going to be here. So, but I think it's interesting as well that you think about it as being sculpture, because of course your original focus at OCA was sculpture,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
are you still doing any sculptural work other than?
Not really. No, sadly, I have not had enough time, because sculpture is time consuming, and I just, haven't been able to concentrate on making a piece. But I will one day.
I just wanted to ask what's coming up next for you. What's your current preoccupation and what do you hope to see?
I haven't really done any brand new work for like 2 years, which is really driving me crazy, because it's like I have to do something. But what has really taken my focus within the last year is a film that's showing this Friday at the AGO. It's called The Incredible 25th Year of Mitzi Bearclaw. I started writing and working on that piece since 2005, but it's taken until now to finish that. And in all fall, started in May. We did a 6-week production in Sudbury, and then through the summer and the fall it was editing, and towards the end of the fall it was like the soundscape and just making it really tight and making it as good as we can. But that's what has been taking up a lot of my time. Yeah.
And hopefully we'll see that in Peterborough somehow.
I hope so. It would be great. Yeah. But
So that's your first, I know you've done video, but was that your first film?
they're showing a film here Thursday night called Kissed by Lightning. It's a feature film. Yeah. So it's my second film. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to do a double header, you come here on Thursday and then you drive to Toronto.
And you can go to Scarborough to the Doris McCarthy and see Nana Bojo's
Oh, right, yeah.
Sisters by Wanda Nanabush, and Honey Moccasin, the film from 1998 is there as part of the work with Rebecca Belmore
Yeah.
and Ursula Johnson and Laurie Blondeau and Shelley Nero. So it's really, it's worth, I think, I saw it, it's worth the, you need to
Worth
go
the
see
drive.
it. Yeah, it's worth the drive from Brantford. I'll tell you that. So.
But the film Friday is sold out, so you can't
So
come.
don't drive around.
Yeah, you can't come.
Okay. Well, thanks to.
Oh, I think there was one question here.
One more?
Yeah.
I do. I just wanted to say I went online before I came here to look at some of your work and read a bit about you. And every time you mention your sense of humor, there was this picture you did of, and I probably got the wrong name, Mohawk women with beehives.
Right.
In beehives. Or,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I don't know why. You know, some things really strike you in that.
That was my most serious photograph.
It's lovely, just lovely. Anyway, but my question was, I wondered if you could talk a bit more, and maybe this is asking too much, especially at the end, but you talked about the sense of responsibility about taking on the name of an art, you know, and I think a lot of us who make stuff, and I've struggled with this for years, is calling myself an artist, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit about taking the part about the responsibility, what that's about for you.
Yeah, well, I can't speak for all the artists, but I just think that that's how I feel when I'm doing something. Like, who's going to see this? How are they going to react to this? You know, why am I using up so much of my time, so much of my material? So it's just like trying to place it in the world so that it has a place there instead of just going, you know, yeah. So that's what I try to do.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So thanks to both of you guys. And it's really, yeah, really been incredible to have both of you in this space, but also to see us be able to animate it in so many different ways. Yesterday there was the second of 3 beating circles, and then just on Thursday, as Shelley mentioned, there's a film screening. We don't have tickets, so it's not sold out. You can come. It's free. So that's from 7 till 9 this Thursday. It'll be in this space. So quite, again, a lovely opportunity to occupy and animate the gallery space. And then there's one more beating circle, but I think those are all full. But it is an interesting thing. We absolutely don't come in and disturb the circle, but it's an interesting thing to see them in this space. And are you coming for the last one too, or no? Just
Yeah, probably not.
probably not. Lori will be back though.
I need to come because I'm going to get it done.
Yeah, and then I also wanted to mention that March 2nd, we've got another artist talk with Arnold Zagaris. So please, if you don't have one of these already, all of your events are listed in that little gray tab there. And keep an eye on it because there's lots of great opportunities and reasons to keep coming back. And speaking of gathering and coming back and going to various places in the gallery, we do have refreshments set up upstairs. And you guys are going to hang around for a little bit. So I'm sure they're going to be hot commodities, but you could probably get in a word or two. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.